We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked.
And complete the dang fence.
This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill.
Cast down your bucket where you are.
We come from France.
And I am, adamantly against illegal immigrants.
They're coming in by the thousands, just unbelievable.
A wall is an immorality.
Who are you rooting for?
Those masters of the universe are at it again.
They're not sending their best.
You maniac! You blew it up!
Welcome to Parsing Immigration Policy, the podcast of the Center for Immigration Studies. My name is Mark Krikorian, Executive Director of the Center. And today we have someone who's looked into an issue that's been in the news. In fact, she's helped put it in the news. And this is the issue of illegal immigrant truck drivers. It was obviously a couple of terrible accidents caused by drivers who did not seem to be fit to drive, couldn't even read road signs. And this is clearly an immigration-related issue, so it's relevant for CIS. And here to talk about it is Jenny Thayer, who's a reporter with the Daily Wire, who has written a couple of recent stories digging into this issue. So, Jenny, thanks for coming on. How long have you been at the Daily Wire now?
Just a little over a month now.
Oh, it's that short. Okay, wow.
Yes,
great. So you're making a splash right away. And you came from the New York Post. So it's kind of interesting. People often go from, online media, as it were, which has always been kind of seen and really was in the past a sort of sideshow. But you went from print media to online media, which really, in some sense, is testimony to how the distinctions there are really blurring. I'm all for the New York Post. I don't mean to diss it in any way, but in some sense, how different is it from the Daily Wire at this point? It's not really like it used to be.
Right. It's been a big shift, but it's a great shift for me. The New York Post is great. The Daily Wire has been fabulous. They really understand the digital space and how things are shifting. And they're utilizing social media really well to get the message out, to spread the word about our reporting, like these stories about immigration that are really hot button issues right now. So I just am excited to be on such a great team and to be working on these great stories on such a big platform.
Great. And just personally, I am a subscriber to Daily Wire, so I'm paying part of your salary. So even if it's only a penny a week or something.
Thank
you. But the reason we wanted to have you on was that you had written a couple stories on this, but the one that kind of made the splash was, the title of it was the question I want to ask: how illegal immigrant truck drivers ended up on America's roads. So how did that happen? And what's the story here?
Right. So we've seen story after story of these devastating crashes involving illegal immigrants who were carrying these non-domiciled commercial driver's licenses. These weren't unlicensed drivers. These were people who came into the country illegally and went through the processes in states like California to get the CDLs, and it's caused devastation on the roads. We had an incident in Florida a few months back where an Indian national, Harjinder Singh, killed 3 people while making an illegal U-turn. He's had to have a translator in his court appearances. He apparently had failed multiple times his testing before he was ultimately passed through after taking, the test 10 times.
And this is a test that's things like, can you read a road sign? That sort of thing, right? In other words, you don't have to get a PhD in whatever it is. It's just, can you operate a giant moving metal bomb on a highway with little cars driving around?
Exactly. And for so long, actually, the testing has been allowed to be in different languages. That's the written test. The skills test, which is in the vehicle, done on the road, that actually has to be done in English. So there's been a lot of questions about whether these private schools that are allowed to do the testing are actually going around the rules there. And this is something the Trump administration is trying to change. They're trying to enforce a lot of these rules on the books and say, this testing has to be done in English. You have to be an English speaker in order to obtain a CDL, because we now see the devastation of not enforcing those laws. And there's been a lot of scrutiny now on these private schools as well that have passed these illegal immigrants through. So in states like Florida's suing California over some of these stories because in Singh's case, he obtained his CDL in California.
Right.
They're really laying down the hammer on Gavin Newsom, who has allowed illegal immigrants to obtain these non-domiciled CDLs. He did so, in many of these states, he did so with kind of the help of the Biden administration, because as we saw millions of illegal immigrants pour across the border under Biden, then there was this second fold issue where they were handing out those work permits like candy.
Just a general work permit authorizing them to get any kind of job. In other words,
Exactly.
Not related to trucking specifically.
Not related to trucking, but, once you apply for asylum, then there's a waiting period. You can then apply for your work permit. Mm-hmm. And the Biden administration was granting these left and right. So that was part of the issue, because then you had those illegal immigrants with their work permits. They didn't have legal authorization to be here. They weren't granted asylum. They went to states like California, and California said, here's your non-domiciled CDL. Go ahead, operate this 18-wheeler, this heavy machinery across the country. And we saw now people who have ended up with those who don't speak English, who don't understand the roads, who don't understand the road signs. And now we're finally seeing a crackdown on this, thankfully, but it's definitely caused a lot of devastation.
So a couple of questions. First, just a CDL is commercial driver's license. That's, in other words, is different from the driver's license you and I have to just drive a car. This is for commercial vehicles, for trucks. But what does the non-domiciled part mean? What I don't understand that.
Right. So that allows people who live in one state to work for a trucking company out of state.
I see. Okay.
So they can cross state lines. They can operate throughout the United States, and they won't have any issues. It was really something that was introduced in 2019 to allow for that, to allow for an opening and for reciprocity. We spoke to a lot of trucking experts about this. And what really it came down to was, yes, it opened a lot of opportunities for truckers to be able to do their jobs. But what it also did was it opened the floodgates for foreigners, especially those who are here illegally, to come in from all over the world and get handed CDLs. And also the trucking industry was facing a high rate of turnover, still is. So they need labor. And so they found cheap labor. And it was the perfect storm that allowed for this issue that we're now seeing just continue to persist on America's roads.
So the non-domiciled license was not originally an immigration issue, right? In other words, there are American truck drivers who have these licenses too, right? So they can drive across state lines?
Exactly.
Interesting.
So,
okay. Now, what is it the feds can do about this? Because there's always a limit, even with regular driver's licenses, as we've seen, like with the Real ID Act, people will, regular people with regular driver's licenses know that, to get a Real ID license, you have to bring in your whatever information. So the feds can't just say for regular driver's licenses, illegal immigrants can't get licenses. They have these requirements that can apply only for federal purposes. So you can't get on a plane with a license that the feds haven't approved of, but you can drive around if your state wants to give licenses to illegals. That's for regular driver's licenses. What can the Federal Department of Transportation do with regard to these commercial driver's licenses?
Right. So where they're really focusing their attention is on the process that it takes to get the non-domiciled CDLs and the training involved and the testing. So one of those things is requiring English proficiency. That's a huge one because we've seen, again, these stories like the one in Florida with Harjinder Singh and others. There was an incident in California as well with another Indian national. They're saying you need to speak English. You need to be able to read those road signs, really basic stuff. That's really crazy to think that we're talking about this having to be a requirement. They're also auditing states that are issuing non-domiciled CDLs. They're saying to states who have issued these, please go through your records and check to see who has these non-domiciled CDLs. If they're not here illegally, you should revoke that. You should have them turn that in. And actually, what's really interesting is, I met plenty of illegal immigrants at the border during the Biden years. One of them actually did end up being a commercial truck driver. And he was always driving across the United States. I mean, he posts on TikTok all the time about it. And I messaged him because he posted about the issue on TikTok. And he said, they're taking away our CDLs. And, I'm worried about what this could mean for me. And he actually did, based on this audit that the Trump administration pushed for in North Dakota. They sent a letter to him because he was issued the CDL there. They said, you need to turn in your CDL. We've reviewed our records and we see that you are not here legally and you need to turn it in. He turned it in, but, we'll see what happens because I don't know how it's being enforced, how they're going to ensure that those who maybe don't want to turn it in still have that revoked. There's so many layers to this issue. It's the local governments who have issued them. It's the training companies that are now under scrutiny by states like Florida because they can provide private training to then pass them through and give them a non-domiciled CDL. Of course, the worst offender of this is California. They've issued about 25% of the non-domiciled CDLs that the feds have reviewed and determined were improperly issued. So rightfully so, a lot of the scrutiny is on Gavin Newsom and the state of California. I recently spoke with actually a family that was victimized by one of these illegal immigrants in California. Their daughter is 6 years old. She is now basically just stuck in a wheelchair. She doesn't have normal functions. She can't really eat normally. She can't speak. And this was a child who was vibrant and fun and funny and running around before. And she was a victim in a multi-car pileup that actually killed 2 people. And she's one of the several injured.
That was caused by an illegal immigrant truck driver.
Yes. This was Delilah Coleman. The illegal immigrant truck driver was an Indian national who was let in across the border by the Biden administration, handed a work permit, got his non-domiciled CDL in California. This child was in a coma for 3 weeks. When she woke up from that coma, she couldn't walk, she couldn't talk, she couldn't eat orally. She is still in a really dire state. I mean, she's having to have 24-hour care basically from her father, who ironically was also a truck driver.
Wow.
And has to now not work. He can't work. He can't be on the road while all these illegal immigrants are out there driving. She underwent a craniectomy, which basically left her with half of her skull out for 4 months.
Wow.
Plenty of broken bones, cerebral palsy, all kinds of development delays, needs for therapy. This is what we're talking about when we're raising the alarms about this issue. People like Delilah Coleman, whose lives have been changed forever, her family's lives have been changed forever. They don't have their daughter back fully. That's something that he brought up to me, is that this is not the same vibrant child that was running around going to kindergarten. I even saw her. I talked to her on FaceTime. This is the real devastation that this issue is causing. The Trump administration, of course, like we said, is trying to close some of these loopholes that have allowed for this. But him being a truck driver himself, he's also said there needs to be higher penalties for people who are out there on the roads who shouldn't have these non-domiciled CDLs, because for too long, there haven't been regulations on that. There haven't been those punishments for people who are out there. They believe they're invincible. And on top of this, the Trump administration is also trying to say, okay, illegal immigrants, we're trying to take them off the roads for having non-domiciled CDLs. If you're going to be out there, if you're a foreigner driving a truck, if you want to be, now they're saying you need to have H-2B, H-2A, E-2 visa. You need to have a more specialized worker visa.
Rather than just a work permit.
Exactly. You're not here legally. That's the reality of it. Whether you like it or not, that's the truth of these cases. their asylum has not been granted.
Right.
They jumped the border illegally. We saw that. We saw what happened under the Biden years. We saw who came in. We heard from Border Patrol agents about the lax vetting, that they were releasing people. They were knowingly releasing people who were on the terror watch list, who were criminals, but they had their hands tied. And now here we are. And this is something that Todd Lyons, the head of ICE, has even said that this is a combined issue because now they're concerned that there could be terrorists that have jumped the border who may seize on this and say, I'll get a non-domiciled CDL and I'll use that truck for terroristic purposes. It's a scary reality that we're dealing with.
Yeah, we've seen that kind of vehicular terrorism in Europe a lot. And even here, there's been a few examples, automobiles mainly. But in Europe, I actually was in Nice when the truck terrorist attack happened there in 2016. I went down to where it happened right afterwards. So, yeah, this is a real possibility. The one question I had, I mean, clearly what it looks like when you're looking at California being the biggest culprit here, it seems like people are looking for the weakest link. There's 50 states that can issue them, although I don't know if you'd get a driver's license in Hawaii to drive a truck since you can't go across state lines. But what can the federal government do to California? Can they make California comply? What's the sort of federal-state relationship there?
The Department of Transportation has given California 30 days to stop issuing these CDLs to illegal immigrants. And if they don't comply with that, then what the federal government is threatening to do is to withhold federal funding from the state of California. The first year, what it'll look like is it'll be $160 million that they will pull from the federal funding to California. And then they say they're going to double it if Newsom, again, digs in his heels on this. And Newsom continues to defend that his roads are safe, that this is a non-issue, that they've had a lower fatal crash rate than the national average. So he's not really put anything out there to show that he's feeling threatened by this at all or that he's going to change things.
Interesting. And Florida is suing California, is that correct? Because of that high-profile accident a few months ago?
Right. So Florida's suing the state of California for issuing the non-domiciled CDL to Harjinder Singh that then led to that fatal crash. And I think what we'll also see come of that is a lot of scrutiny on several layers that have allowed for this issue to persist across our country, that it'll go after those private schools that are training these illegal immigrants that are obtaining CDLs, that it'll look at how the state is issuing these, who it's given them to. I'm sure we'll get a bigger picture of what California has been doing for years now. And I think it'll set a legal precedent that will, hopefully solve this issue once and for all and really, ensure that our roads are safe.
And so the private schools thing is interesting because obviously for regular driver's license, there's driving schools. But every time I've taken a driver's test, actually I only took it once. I mean, when I first got my license, it was the Registry of Motor Vehicles in Massachusetts. In other words, the government employee was the one who was riding along and doing my test. Can these private institutions actually certify these truck drivers, or does there have to be somebody from the... Really? That's amazing. Yeah.
So then they're handing the certification to these illegal immigrants who are then going to the DMV and obtaining their non-domiciled CDLs. Wow. So there's been a question of what does the oversight look like in states like California over these schools? Because these are ending up in the hands of people, again, who aren't speaking English, who clearly don't understand the road signs, who are in court now for allegedly killing people, needing translators. When police pulled them over during these accidents, you can see on the body cam footage that they can't really communicate with those officers. So there's a lot of questions that they're looking into and saying this issue, of course, goes back to the federal government issuing those work permits. Then it goes to the states that honored those work permits and issued those non-domiciled CDLs. But it's also that they did so based on the training and certification of those private schools.
Wow. That's just asking for corruption opportunities there, it seems to me. I mean, that's, in other words, you pay off the private schools. You can get corruption even in a government DMV, obviously, but it seems to me to be a whole lot easier to pay off some, somebody supposedly giving you a driver's test for trucking. Anyway, so it's just, that's appalling. I had no idea. So what are the companies that own these trucks paying any price? Because these aren't owner operators, right? These are just guys hired by larger companies to drive trucks.
Right. So I think we'll start to see maybe the fallout of that as they lose labor over this. How will they be scrutinized in the future for employing these illegal immigrants because they saw a need for more labor as the trucking industry, like I said, was facing a high turnover rate. So they said, let's just go for the cheapest option here. That's where we ended up in this place as well. But, we have yet to see any real laying down the hammer on those companies. I'm sure as states like Florida investigate what led to people like Singh getting a non-domiciled CDL and the process, then maybe that will come up through their probing of this issue. Right.
So has there been any reaction either from like trucking company associations, because every industry's got lobbies, or is there an association of like truck drivers, not a union really, it wouldn't be, but I mean just like a grouping of truck drivers or the truck companies? Have either one of them weighed in or gotten involved in this issue?
Yes. So the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association, that's a big one that has backed the Trump administration's pressure campaign and crackdown on this. They've spoken out saying that there's really been no checks and balances on the issuance of non-domiciled CDL. So they're very happy to see that there's going to be more scrutiny on these third-party testing sites, that they're going to make sure that they're employing more American truck drivers, and, that they're making sure that people who should have never gotten licenses in the first place are being taken off the roads, because ICE is also cracking down here too. We're seeing some major operations in states like Oklahoma, Indiana, where ICE is out there and they're pulling people over. They're pulling truck drivers over and they're arresting dozens of them who have been issued non-domiciled CDLs.
And they're doing this, as I understand it, at like the way stations. In other words, when you come from Illinois into Indiana, your truck is often, people notice I've never obviously been to one. I've never driven a truck. But when you drive on a highway, there are these way stations where a truck has to go in because you can't be over a certain weight. It damages the road. There's all kinds of rules like that. And that's where the both the state troopers for that state, but also ICE, are looking into people's paperwork as well as just the weight of the truck.
Right. And this is really the perfect example, too, of what it looks like when state authorities are allowed to work with ICE, that they're able to pull over these truck drivers, have ICE intervene. They're working hand in hand to crack down on this and really make sure that, the laws, like in California, in sanctuary states, aren't getting in the way of their safety, in the safety of their state drivers. And so it's a testament to the fact that sanctuary cities, again, they cause devastation. They allow illegal immigrants to hide in plain sight. And this is what it looks like when you have the opposite of that. And they're having a lot of success with this.
Right. Basically underlines the point that every state's a border state and every town's a border town. And in a sense, every place ends up being a sanctuary city or a sanctuary jurisdiction, because if California, as a sanctuary jurisdiction, protects illegal immigrants and gives them truck driver's licenses, that matters to you in Indiana and Oklahoma and everywhere else as well. So it really is interesting. Now, one thing you didn't write about, I just wanted to mention before I just asked as the last thing, you did a story about in the Texas DMV, they found illegal aliens getting licenses. This wasn't a trucking thing, as I understand it, But the last thing on the trucking thing I just wanted to raise is that you had mentioned that the feds are like now insisting that if you're going to be a foreigner with a truck, driving a truck, you have to have an actual proper legal status, not just a work permit, because you hopped the border, something like H-2B, which is the visa that actually some trucking companies use. It's not the H-2A, which is for farm workers. H-2B is for unskilled non-farm workers. And this is, I'm not putting words in your mouth, so this is just me, but the idea that driving a truck is a job Americans won't do and that we need to import foreigners on visas to do it is just preposterous, even if they can read the road signs. It seems to me this shouldn't be allowed. And if trucking companies are having trouble finding enough drivers or having a lot of turnover, well, then they should respond the way the market insists. You increase the wages, you change the working conditions, not be able to make a end run around the American labor market by importing people on visas, even if they can read the signs, as I said. But the last thing I wanted to ask was a piece you wrote just a couple days ago on ICE nabbing a bunch of illegal drivers because of a loophole in the Texas DMV. If you could just tell us about that.
So this is something that came up in a letter that Republican State Rep Brian Harrison had sent to the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles Board. He had received what he said was an alarming number of reports of illegal immigrants being able to register their vehicles in Texas without state licenses. So this is a major reason that they're out there on the roads. And it's actually led to ICE being able to arrest. I mean, in Houston last week, in a single day, 120 illegal immigrant drivers were arrested on Texas roadways.
Wow. Just to be clear, these are regular driver's licenses, not the truck drivers.
They're getting vehicle registration.
That's what I'm saying. Oh, that's right. They're registering, right. But
Yes.
My point is it's passenger cars, not trucks. But it's still, I mean, the issue here clearly is illegal immigrants. The whole point of these limitations are that you shouldn't be able to do things like register your car or get a driver's license if you're an illegal alien.
Exactly. And especially in a state like Texas, it's really shocking that this is happening. So Rep. Harrison is looking into it because he's saying that, as the Lone Star State, we should be the ones to really be a force multiplier for the Trump administration's agenda to go after illegal immigration. And it turns out, in his words, that they're incentivizing it. So if they don't change things, he's threatening to take some legislative action to make sure that they're not out there on the roads, because as Texans, and I live here in Texas, we've been under the assumption that illegal immigrants can't be out there on the roads legally. They don't have the ability to get driver's licenses here. This is not a state like New York. But now this is really alarming to hear that they do have a way, that there is this loophole. And thankfully, ICE is out there getting them off the roads. But this is something that is probably going to be ongoing, that's going to be addressed now.
And it's interesting that people, Texas has this rep of being super hawkish on immigration. And in a lot of ways, Texas is. But Florida really does kind of put them to shame, because Florida is much more consistently tough on immigration enforcement. Whereas in Texas, you do have a kind of competing interests from, farmers and ranchers and other companies, that employers of illegal immigrants. And so, Texas still doesn't have a E-Verify mandate, for instance, which is not related specifically to the driver's license issue, but it is a sign of, seriousness about controlling immigration. So it's good that the places where there are shortfalls in Texas's commitment, that they get exposed, so people understand where to direct their energy and attention.
Exactly. And I think this is one of those signs where Texas is more reactive than proactive, like Florida is, like you said. Mm-hmm. And they find out about things because ICE ends up pulling up 120 of them off the road. And this is now a problem.
Right.
What was happening under the Biden administration when ICE had their hands tied?
Yeah, Lord knows.
Exactly.
So thank you for coming in, Jenny Terre. reporter with the Daily Wire. We'll have links to these stories in the show notes. And any teasers you can give us about stuff you're working on that we should be keeping an eye out for?
I'm always working on these big stories that really affect how we live our day-to-day lives. I can't preview anything right now, but if you follow me, you will be apprised of everything I'm working on. I can guarantee that. What's your Twitter handle or X? It's spelled X, but I still pronounce it Twitter. What's your handle there? Jenny Estair, JennieStaer. And is there a link at Daily Wire, like where you would be, where all of your stuff would be? Yeah, it's under my name on the Daily Wire. You can find it. Yeah, there. I'm looking here, Daily Wire /author/Jenny Tair, it looks like. So thanks for coming in. I expect big things from you at Daily Wire. They've always covered immigration stories. Sometimes I don't think they've really had a dedicated immigration reporter. Have they before? No, but they recognize that this is a really hot button issue and it affects all of our lives. And so I'm really grateful that I'm the one to cover it. And I just can't wait to continue to tell these stories. They're really important to me. Excellent. Well, we look forward to more great things, Jenny. Thank you for coming on. Jenny Tair from the Daily Wire. And maybe more blockbuster stories. We'll have you back on to talk about them in the future. You got it. Thanks. And just a quick closing thought. The Thursday, when we post this, you may be listening to it afterwards, but Thursday, November 6th, is the 39th anniversary of President Reagan signing IRCA, the Immigration Reform and Control Act, that amnestied close to 3 million illegal immigrants and made it unlawful to employ illegal immigrants for the first time ever. Before that, it was explicitly legal to be an employer of illegal immigrants. This was seen as a grand bargain. It was a result of 5 or 6 years of back and forth between the House and the Senate, passing different versions of bills, and was presented as, a kind of solution to the immigration problem, that settled illegal immigrants would be granted green cards, but that going forward, the magnet of illegal immigration, which is the ability to get jobs, would be turned off. Obviously, it didn't work out that way. And not only did it not work out that way, it was the amnesty supporters who grudgingly agreed to make it illegal to employ illegal immigrants, knew from the get-go they were going to welsh on the deal because they got their amnesty first. The enforcement, they made sure never happened. And the reason I bring it up is that betrayal casts a shadow to this day. It has poisoned immigration politics and was the reason that George Bush's attempt at doing the same thing in 2005, 6, and 7 failed. It's the reason the Gang of Eight bill that Obama was working on, as well as others, in 2013, 2014 failed because, as the saying goes, fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, shame on me. The immigration policy has been shaped, or immigration politics, rather, has been shaped for 4 decades by the legacy of this bill, which seemed like a sensible thing to at least give a try at the time, but has turned out to be clearly a mistake. And so the lesson that the supporters of immigration control, supporters of integrity in the immigration system have taken from this is that enforcement and the systems necessary to have enforcement have to come first before anybody gets any kind of legal status at all. And that's something that the pro-amnesty folks, whether on the right or the left, they've refused to accept, refused even to consider, which is why we've had a kind of stalemate in immigration policy and immigration lawmaking now for well over a generation. And we'll see if, the
election of Donald Trump twice now on this issue of integrity in the immigration system is finally going to change the calculus, change the thinking of the pro-amnesty people. There's no evidence of that yet, but we'll see. There hasn't been any activity in Congress related to immigration, not much at all, for a long time. But ultimately, we need to get past the legacy of the 1986 bill signed 39 years ago this week if we're going to have not so much a solution to immigration, because it's never solved. It's just something that you always have to deal with, like foreign policy or tax policy. But only if we get past it will we get to a place where we'll have a more kind of stable and normal politics of immigration, a kind of equilibrium on immigration, where there'll be disagreement, but it'll be, around the 50-yard line instead of the kind of fundamental difference of opinions on immigration, difference of views on what immigration is and how it should run and whether there should even be an immigration policy at all, which many on the libertarian right and the hard left reject, that immigration law itself is illegitimate in their view. We need to get past this. I don't have any answers for how to do that, but the anniversary at least reminds us of why our immigration politics has been so poisoned for decades now because of the betrayal of the pro-amnesty people who essentially welched on the deal that the pro-enforcement people thought had been reached 39 years ago this week with the Immigration Reform and Control Act. That's it for this episode of Parsing Immigration Policy. Thanks to Jenny Terre for giving us so much of her time. Thanks to Brian Griffith, our producer, for making this work. Thanks to all of you for listening. And if you have any comments, suggestions, complaints, what have you, feel free to email us at center@cis.org. And I hope you'll tune in next week.